Your millionaire humiliates simple elderly man, but fate surprises her in just 2 days. Clara Montero settled comfortably into her seat in first class on the luxurious international flight from London to New York. The ambient glow enveloped her, with gleaming metals and fine fabrics that seemed to mirror her elevated status. She glanced around with a slight smile of superiority on her lips, observing the passengers occupying the seats nearby. Deep down, there was an air of disdain in her gaze, as if everyone around her were mere shadows of her grandiosity. It's incredible how some people still haven't understood that class is everything, Clara thought, as she tucked a perfectly styled lock of hair behind her ear. The flight attendant, a friendly young man, approached her with a cordial smile. "Good afternoon, Ms. Montero. May I offer you something to drink? We have a selection of premium champagnes," he said, consulting the list on his clipboard. "Champagne, of course. The best you have," Clara replied with a dismissive gesture, as if simply ordering a drink were an obligation of the attendant. Meanwhile, the cabin door opened with a soft creak, and Mr. Augusto entered, dressed simply in an outfit that clashed entirely with the opulence surrounding him. He wore a calm expression and a gentle smile, but the looks of disapproval and disdain that surrounded him quickly disarmed him. Clara, with a piercing glance, whispered to the flight attendant, gesturing toward the man, "You can't allow that kind of person to be here. He doesn't belong in this place," she said, her tone heavy with contempt. The attendant hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "But ma'am, he has a valid ticket. I can't just remove him," he replied, trying to maintain his composure. "Don't make me repeat myself, please. It's a matter of good taste," Clara insisted, tilting her head back defiantly, challenging anyone who dared to disagree with her. Mr. Augusto, noticing the conversation, stopped and looked directly at Clara. With a calm smile and a serene gaze, he said, "I'm sorry, young lady, but it seems that true good taste lies in how we treat others." Clara let out a sarcastic laugh, as if Augusto's statement were a joke. "Do you really think someone like you can teach me about good taste? Just look at yourself. What kind of person dresses like that on a first-class flight?" She dramatically gestured to her designer clothes, which sparkled under the cabin lights. The passengers around them began to murmur, feeling uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. Some averted their eyes, while others exchanged furtive glances, trying to "It doesn't matter what you think of me, young lady. What truly matters is how I feel inside," Augusto replied, his voice firm yet calm. "And remember, some may be poorly dressed, but that doesn't define who they are." Clara's arrogance began to wane slightly, but she was unwilling to back down. "You should be ashamed to be here. What have you done to deserve this place?" Her voice was cutting, and the murmurs grew louder, with some passengers now clearly supporting Augusto. "I did what I could, and my life is rich in experiences you perhaps have yet to know," he responded without anger, but with a firmness that made Clara hesitate for a brief moment. Silence settled for a moment, as the passengers turned their attention to the confrontation. "Experiences? You look more like a lost beggar at a fashion show," Clara retorted, irritated. "Once you may have been successful, but that was long ago, wasn't it? Now you settle for crumbs." The fury and humiliation radiating from Clara were palpable, but Augusto remained steadfast, his dignity shining through every word he spoke. "True wealth is not measured by appearance or what one owns. I may not have what I once did, but I am at peace with who I am and what I've done in life." The passengers around them were now tense, the atmosphere charged with discomfort that threatened to explode. Clara, realizing she had gone too far, retreated, but not without casting a disdainful look at Augusto. "Enjoy your peace, then. I guarantee it won't last long here." With that, she turned away, leaving behind a trail of murmurs and disapproving glances, while Augusto stood firm, his posture still resolute, a look of sadness and compassion on his face. The flight continued on its course, but the tension between the two had already left an indelible mark, foreshadowing a twist that would change their lives forever. Clara Montero watched her glass and steel mansion as she sat on one of the white leather sofas in the living room. The walls were adorned with artworks from renowned contemporary artists, each piece carefully selected by her, who took pride in her collection. Even surrounded by luxury, a sense of loneliness enveloped her, like a thick fog that made it hard to breathe. The shine of the objects around her failed to warm her heart. "Why aren't you at the gallery yet, Clara?" asked her assistant Bianca, interrupting her thoughts. "The guests have already started to arrive. Let them wait," Clara replied with a tone of disdain. "We need to ensure that everything is perfect." I can't afford to look unprepared." As Bianca left, Clara allowed herself a moment of reflection. She remembered her difficult childhood when her mother, a strong and determined woman, worked 3 jobs to support the family. The memories of sleepless nights, studying while her classmates were having fun, haunted her. The pressure was relentless. "You need to be someone in life, Clara," her mother always said, as if her worth were tied to financial success. She stood up and walked to the window. From the heights of her mansion, she gazed at the city that never sleeps. "Look where I am now," she thought, a smug smile forming on her lips. "This life is mine, and no one is going to take it from me." But as the smile faded, a troubling question echoed in her mind. At what cost? Flashbacks invaded her mind, showing a young Clara struggling to stand out in a world that seemed to conspire against her. She remembered being in the classroom, surrounded by classmates who were having fun while she devoured books and worked hard for good grades. The image of her mother, exhausted but proud, encouraging her not to give up, stood out in her memory. "You are capable of great things, Clara. Remember that." Over time, Clara graduated from one of the best universities in the country. From then on, her rise was meteoric. She founded her own company, a startup that quickly became a respected name in the market. However, as her wealth grew, she distanced herself from her roots. The desire to be seen as a winner led her to build an armor of arrogance and disdain for those she deemed inferior. "These people don't know what hard work is," she often said, looking at employees who, in her eyes, merely took up space. "If they can't succeed, it's because they don't put in enough effort." One day, during a meeting at her company, Clara faced an employee who had an innovative idea. "That's ridiculous," she shot back, not even bothering to listen to what he had to say. "Do you think you can teach me something? Come back when you have something truly worthwhile." The man left the room, defeated. Clara, on the other hand, felt victorious. "No one is better than me," she thought, applauding herself for her determination and success. Yet even amid all this ostentation, Clara couldn't shake a persistent feeling: loneliness. The parties and events she organized were just a facade. No one really knew her. "Maybe this is what I deserve," she thought, staring at her reflection in the mirror. "Who would want to be close to someone like me?" One day, while consulting her lawyer about a new partnership, he remarked, "You need to be careful, Clara. Sometimes people come close to you just for your money." Those words hit her like an arrow. Clara smiled, but inside a storm was brewing. "I don't need friends," she thought, "just my success." However, deep down, a part of her desperately wished someone would truly see her, not as the arrogant millionaire, but as the woman she had once dreamed of becoming. Augusto was in his simple home, a modest apartment reflecting his new reality. The walls were adorned with photos of his family, each telling a story of love and perseverance. He sat in a worn but comfortable chair, gazing at a particular image, an old photo of his granddaughter Sophia, as a child, with a radiant smile lighting up her face. Augusto's heart tightened at the thought of the girl's declining health, which had worsened in recent months. Despite the difficulties, Augusto always sought to maintain a positive attitude. He believed that as long as there was love and hope, there were still reasons to smile. That day, he recalled the times when his company was thriving, when he received awards and recognition in his field. "I never imagined I would be here one day," Augusto murmured to himself, his voice choked with nostalgia. "Life has its twists and turns, doesn't it?" He stood up, looking out the window, watching the bustling street where people hurried by. "But I can't give up," he said, determined. "Sophia needs me." Flashbacks invaded his mind, bringing memories of his life as a businessman. He remembered conferences, meetings with major investors, and celebrations after closing important deals. "I was respected," he thought, "but what is that worth now?" The financial crisis that hit his business felt like a distant nightmare, but the scars were still present. The memory of his sick and fragile granddaughter made Augusto pick up his phone to check messages. There was a new update about the treatment she needed, and the cost was exorbitant. He let out a heavy sigh. "What am I going to do?" he murmured, feeling the weight of responsibility. Meanwhile, Clara, in her luxurious London apartment, was surrounded by a world of ostentation, but her mind was restless. The humiliation she inflicted on Augusto during the flight still haunted her. "How could I be so cruel?" she thought, biting her lower lip. To her, wealth had always been synonymous with power, but now she felt vulnerable and full of insecurities. The disdainful looks she received from some passengers on the flight lingered with her, like a persistent shadow. At the hospital, where Clara and Augusto would meet later, fate began to weave its threads. Augusto was there, prepared to visit his granddaughter, while Clara was receiving news about her mother. When Augusto arrived at the information desk, he was greeted with smiles and respectful greetings from the staff. He no longer wore the suit he used to don for business meetings, but his dignity remained intact. The doctor who greeted him said, "Dr. Augusto, your presence here is always a relief for all of us." "Thank you," Augusto replied with a faint smile. "I'm only here for my granddaughter. She is all I have now." He couldn't help the sadness that filled his heart when he thought about Sophia's health. Meanwhile, Clara watched the scene from a distance, unsure who this man was who commanded so much respect. Curiosity led her to approach, but as soon as she heard his name mentioned, her heart skipped a beat. It can't be, she thought, recalling the humiliation she had inflicted on him. The revelation hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Mr. Augusto? The same Augusto that I— Oh no," she murmured, pale. She hesitated, her chest tight with shame. Clara knew she needed to confront him, but the idea terrified her. How can I apologize to a man I publicly humiliated? Her mind raced, trying to find a way to redeem herself. Augusto, already aware of her presence, didn't ignore her. He was not a man of grudges, but he felt he needed time to understand what had happened. "What do you want, Clara?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy with the emotional weight she couldn't ignore. I just wanted to apologize," Clara began, her voice trembling. "What I did was horrible. I'm not like that. I'm just trying to understand how people can be so cruel." Augusto looked her in the eyes, and for a moment, they both got lost in their shared pain. "True wealth lies in how we treat others, Clara," he said, the words heavy as lead. "And that can't be bought with money." Tears began to slip down Clara's face as Augusto turned away, determined not to let the pain of the past define him. Life had taught him that every encounter could be an opportunity to grow, and he was resolved not to miss that chance. Clara, on the other hand, knew she had a long road ahead, but the journey began there in that hospital, with a man she had initially scorned but now saw in a new light. After the flight, Clara Montero found herself in a state of restlessness. The arrogance that defined her seemed to have lost its power in the face of the disapproving glances she received from the other passengers. Sitting in her luxurious living room, with her feet resting on a crystal table, she tried to ignore the echoes of humiliation she had caused Mr. Augusto. However, the feeling of discomfort lingered, like a shadow following her. "How could I have been so cruel?" she murmured to herself, gazing out the window at the city sprawling beyond, illuminated by the nightlights. The mansion, filled with expensive objects and artworks, no longer felt cozy. Clara got up and walked over to the bar, pouring herself a drink. As the golden liquid slid down her throat, she recalled Augusto's expression, a mix of surprise and pain, upon hearing her cutting words. He didn't deserve that, she thought, a growing weight in her chest. At that moment, her cell phone vibrated on the table. Clara looked at the screen and saw her mother's name. A chill ran down her spine. "What happened now?" she answered with an anxious tone. "Clara, your mother had an accident. She's in the hospital." The assistant's voice sounded worried. Clara's world crumbled. The image of her mother, always strong and protective, now vulnerable and injured, filled her with a wave of despair. "I'm on my way," Clara responded, her voice trembling. She grabbed her bag and in a frenzy left the house. The journey to the hospital felt endless. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, and the image of Augusto wouldn't leave her head. What would he be thinking of me now? Upon arriving at the hospital, Clara rushed toward the entrance, her heart racing. As she walked in, the smell of disinfectant and the sight of nurses rushing back and forth enveloped her in a reality she didn't want to face. At the information desk, she noticed a group of people chatting and laughing. A man of simple appearance, but with an aura of respect, stood at the center of the conversation. Clara furrowed her brow, sensing something was off. "Excuse me, where is my mother's room?" she interrupted, her voice loud and authoritative. The people turned to her, and the man, who she didn't recognize at first, looked directly into her eyes. "Calm down, ma'am. Her room is 302, but you might want to wait a moment. The doctor is evaluating her," he said with a warm smile. Clara was intrigued by how everyone treated him, as if he were a figure of authority. Clara couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation about the medical team and a director whom everyone seemed to deeply respect. "He's one of the best we have," commented a nurse. "Mr. Augusto is truly an incredible man," The words hit her like a bolt of lightning. The name Mr. Augusto made her freeze. It can't be, Clara thought, her heart racing. When she finally saw him again, now in a white coat, the truth struck her like a punch to the stomach. The man she had humiliated on the flight was, in fact, the hospital director. Clara felt a lump in her throat as the reality settled in. How could I have been so despicable? She whispered to herself. She watched him conversing with a doctor, his confident and dignified posture contrasting sharply with the weakness she had projected onto him. Shame overwhelmed her, and for a moment she wished to hide. Overcome by a mix of nervousness and determination, Clara took a deep breath and approached Augusto. Mr. Augusto, she began, her voice hesitant. He looked at her, and for a brief moment, recognition crossed his face. I can't express how sorry I am for what happened on the flight. Augusto watched her in silence, his intense gaze penetrating. What you did was painful, Clara, he replied, the firmness in his voice making her shrink back. But I am not a victim. Life has taught me to deal with the arrogance of others. I know, Clara admitted, her voice low and filled with regret. I was wrong, I acted despicably, I just didn't know who you were. And that says a lot about you, he responded, the coldness in his words sending a chill through her. True wealth is not measured by material possessions. It's about how we treat others. Clara felt moisture in her eyes, struggling against the tears that threatened to fall. I want to change. I want to make a difference. Please, give me a chance to redeem myself. Augusto observed her in silence, the weight of their words hanging between them. The fate of the two was beginning to intertwine, but for Clara, the path to redemption seemed more challenging than she had imagined. Clara entered the hospital with her heart racing, her hurried footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. The environment was a stark contrast to the ostentation she was used to. The white walls and abstract art were nothing compared to the expensive pieces in her home. She felt a knot in her stomach as she recalled what had happened on the flight. Looking around, she tried to ignore the curious stares of staff and visitors, who seemed to watch her as if recognizing the woman who had behaved so despicably. Why am I here? She murmured to herself as she approached the information desk. Anxiety consumed her, and the thought of seeing her mother on the verge of death left her unsettled. The sound of murmurs and conversations around her was almost deafening, but Clara forced herself to focus. When she reached the desk, a nurse greeted her with a warm smile. Good morning, how can I help you? The nurse asked, looking into Clara's eyes. My mother is here. She had an accident, Clara replied, attempting to keep her voice steady while feeling the emotion bubbling inside her. I understand. Let me check her status for you. What's her name? The nurse quickly typed on the computer as Clara grew increasingly nervous. Maria Montero. As she waited, Clara said, Clara overheard a nearby conversation that caught her attention. Dr. Augusto is truly admired by everyone. He did an incredible job with the emergency team, said one of the doctors, with a tone of reverence. Curious, Clara turned to listen more closely. Yes, everyone respects his work. He's a true leader, always putting the patients first, replied another voice. Clara furrowed her brow, trying to remember where she had heard that name before. Your mother is stable, but her condition is delicate. I recommend you see her as soon as possible, said the nurse with a concerned look. Thank you, Clara murmured, distracted. She stepped away from the desk and began walking through the hospital corridors trying to focus on her mother's health, but her mind kept wandering. The name Dr. Augusto echoed in her head, and a strange feeling began to grow within her. Krikrirer. As Clara entered the room, she was greeted by the characteristic smell of antiseptic. Her mother lay on the bed, pale but serene. Clara sat beside her, holding her hand and feeling the comforting warmth. Mom, I'm here. You're going to be okay, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. As Clara tried to calm both herself and her mother, something caught her attention from outside the room. Augusto, a group of doctors, the man she had humiliated on the plane, and among them was Mr. He was dressed in white, a stethoscope hanging around his neck, and his posture exuded confidence and respect. Clara watched him for a moment, unable to believe this was the same man she had looked down upon. Who is that? Clara murmured to herself, confused about why she was so intrigued. A passing nurse heard her and replied, That's Dr. Augusto, one of the best doctors in this hospital. He has an admirable track record helping many people over the years. Clara felt a lump in her throat. The man she had belittled was, in fact, a respected and admired figure, and the reality of what she had done began to weigh heavily on her conscience. With her heart racing, Clara decided she needed to find him, to understand how he could be so respected and admired even after the humiliation he had suffered. She stood up from her chair, determined to apologize, but hesitated when she saw him animatedly talking to other doctors, who surrounded him with smiles and words of admiration. Doubt made her hesitate. How could she approach a man who seemed so distant yet so close to everyone? "Dr. Augusto," called a female doctor, her eyes sparkling. "You are an inspiration to us all." Clara felt her heart tighten. The man she had treated as less than nothing was a true hero. In a moment of weakness, she turned and looked out the window, trying to clear her mind, but the image of Augusto wouldn't leave her thoughts. What she had done was irreversible, and now, seeing him surrounded by respect, Clara felt an urgent need to redeem herself. As Clara walked down the hospital corridor, her heart raced. The atmosphere was heavy, and the reality of her arrogance on the flight still tormented her. She couldn't stop thinking about the look of disdain she had thrown at Mr. Augusto, a man who had now become an enigma in her mind. The idea that he was the hospital's director surprised and shamed her. What had she done? What had led her to act so cruelly? Meanwhile, Augusto was conversing with a group of doctors, his calm and dignified demeanor catching everyone's attention. He spoke about a new protocol for patients with chronic illnesses, his eyes shining with passion and knowledge. Clara, standing at a distance, observed the scene. The man she had belittled was respected and admired, while she, the wealthy businesswoman, felt small and insignificant. Determined to confront him, Clara approached but hesitated upon noticing how others were focused on him. "Why should I care about their opinion?" she thought. Still, doubt paralyzed her. Finally, she found the courage to interrupt the conversation, her nervous tone betraying her insecurity. "Mr. Augusto, can we talk for a moment?" The doctors dispersed, and Augusto turned to her, his expression neutral but with a hint of curiosity. "Yes, Clara, what do you need?" His voice was gentle, yet Clara felt a weight in his words. I just wanted to apologize for what happened on the flight," she began, hesitantly. "I shouldn't have acted disrespectful and arrogant." Augusto looked at her for a moment, weighing her words. "Do you really believe that an apology is enough, Clara? What you did was not just an offense to me, but an offense to everyone who feels inferior to you because of your status." Clara felt a wave of shame wash over her face. "I know, and that's exactly why I'm here. I don't want to be that person. I want to understand why I was so cruel. Sometimes the wealthiest people are the ones who lack wisdom the most," Augusto replied, his tone firm yet not aggressive. "True wealth isn't in possessions, but in how we treat others. Arrogance is often a mask for deep insecurities." His words hit her like a blow. Clara remembered her childhood, the struggles she faced, and how, over the years, she had built a fortress of wealth and power to protect herself from pain. "You're right," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I lost myself trying to be someone I'm not." Augusto studied her, and for a brief moment, he saw a spark of sincerity in her eyes. "Recognizing this is the first step, Clara. But the real challenge is change. Are you willing to do that?" She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. "Yes, I want to change. I don't want to be the woman who humiliates others to feel superior. I want to learn from you, from your experience." "Learning is a long and difficult process," Augusto said, his expression softening a bit. "But if you're willing, I can show you that there are ways to use your position for good. Many people need help, and you can make a difference." Clara felt a wave of hope and determination. "Then let me help, Augusto. Not just you, but everyone who needs it. I want to reverse what I did and become someone who truly matters. If you're ready for that, then we can begin," he replied, a slight smile beginning to form on his face. "But remember, the journey will be long. You will have to face many of your own demons." "I'm ready," Clara asserted, feeling a new strength within her. "I won't give up this time." Augusto looked at her for a moment, assessing her sincerity. "Then let's take the first step. Change begins now." And so, in that cold and impersonal environment of the hospital, both realized that a new friendship could be born based on mutual respect and the pursuit of redemption. Clara Montero was determined to change. The revelation that Mr. Augusto, the man she had humiliated, was the director of the hospital where her mother was staying, had the shame she felt transformed into a burning desire to redeem herself. In the following days, she began spending more time at the hospital, observing the environment, the interactions between staff and patients. It was an entirely different world from her own, where wealth and status mattered little in the face of life and health. On a sunny morning, Clara decided to approach the nursing staff. She introduced herself as Clara Montero and began asking about the lives of patients here. She asked, her voice filled with sincerity. A nurse, surprised by the wealthy woman's approach, hesitantly replied, "Well, we always need donations for medication and equipment, and of course, support for low-income patients who can't afford treatments." Clara paused, reflecting on the nurse's words. She knew she had the resources to help. "I want to organize a fundraising event. Can we work together to make this happen?" The nurse, visibly moved, smiled. "That would be amazing, Mrs. Montero. That would truly make a difference." In the following days, Clara threw herself into organizing the event. She remembered the community she had always ignored, the people who needed support. One afternoon, while reviewing the plans in her mansion, her phone rang. It was Augusto. Clara hesitated but decided to answer. "Augusto, Mr. I would like to talk to you about the event I'm organizing at the hospital," she said, her voice a mix of nervousness and determination. "I don't think I have much to contribute, Mrs. Montero," he replied, the coldness still evident in his voice. "Please, just listen. I'm trying to do the right thing, and I know you have valuable insight into what the hospital really needs. I would like to count on your help," Clara insisted. After a moment of silence, Augusto said, "If you're genuinely willing to make a difference, I'll be there, but I can't promise it will be easy." The empathy Clara began to develop for Augusto pushed her to work even harder. Over the next week, she and Augusto met several times, discussing the event's details. He guided her on how to approach the community and structure the fundraising. With each meeting, Clara felt the distance between them closing, even though he still maintained a certain reserve. During one of these meetings, Clara opened up to Augusto. "I never realized how far removed I was from people's reality. I always believed that money could solve everything, but now I see that it's about how we treat each other." She looked into his eyes, hoping for a sign of understanding. Augusto watched her closely. "True wealth isn't measured in material possessions, Clara. Compassion and the connections we make. You're beginning to understand this, and that's an important step." Clara smiled, feeling that for the first time, she was doing something meaningful. "Thank you for helping me see this, Augusto. I really want to change." As the day of the event approached, Clara felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Deep down, she feared that people would still see her as the arrogant millionaire who had humiliated Augusto. But when the day finally arrived, she was determined to show her new perspective. In the hospital's grand hall, Clara felt nervous, yet excited. The atmosphere was filled with people who had come together to support the cause. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and approached the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. I'm here tonight not just to talk about fundraising, but about the importance of empathy and community. We all face challenges, and it's our duty to take care of one another." Clara's words echoed in the hall, and she noticed respectful looks directed at her. At the back of the room, Augusto watched her, his eyes shining with a mix of pride and surprise. With each phrase she spoke, Clara felt she was breaking free from the chains of her former arrogance. More importantly, she was starting to build a new relationship based on understanding and mutual respect. Clara walked down the hospital corridor, her heart racing. Anxiety consumed her, but there was a growing determination inside her. She knew her mother was recovering, but learning that Augusto was one of the doctors responsible for her care made her even more intrigued. The man she had humiliated on the flight was now responsible for saving her mother's life. This unexpected connection filled her with a mix of gratitude and guilt that followed her like a shadow. When Clara finally found Augusto in the waiting room, he was talking with a group of doctors. The way everyone treated him, with respect and admiration, made her hesitate. He seemed so comfortable, so respected, and that made her feel even smaller. She approached but was paralyzed by shyness. Instead of introducing herself, she decided to just observe. "It's good to see you here, Clara," Augusto said, turning to her. His voice was firm, but there was a lightness that surprised her. "Augusto, I wanted to talk to you about what happened on the flight," Clara began, her hands trembling slightly. I feel so ashamed. I don't know what got into me. You're not the first, Clara. Many people feel superior in moments of insecurity. That's not new to me," Augusto replied with a calmness that almost irritated her. He assessed her with a gaze that seemed to penetrate her soul. "What you need to understand is that a person's worth isn't measured by their possessions or appearance." "I know," Clara said, her voice choking. "I really do. But I was so desperate to feel important that I ended up hurting someone who is actually much more valuable than I am." Augusto sighed, observing the sincerity in her eyes. You've been working hard to change, Clara. That's a good start. But true change comes from within, not just from external wave of emotion. I want to do something for you, Augusto. For everything you've done for my mother. I want to make amends. Redemption isn't something that can be bought or granted. It's a process, Clara, he replied, his tone softer but still serious. And to be honest, I appreciate the intention, but I'm still struggling to trust you. Hurt doesn't fade easily. She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. I understand. But the situation is more complicated than it seems. My mother, she's recovering and I'm grateful to you. But there's something more I need to know. Augusto looked at her, suspicion mixed with curiosity in his gaze. What do you mean? Clara took a deep breath, deciding it was time to open up. I heard you have a granddaughter. I would like to know how she's doing. If there's anything I can do to help. Augusto's expression changed. There was a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes, but he didn't let himself be swayed. She's sick. The treatment is expensive and I can't afford it. The hospital does what it can, but it's not enough, Clara completed, feeling the weight of the situation. I didn't know. If there was anything I could do, I would like to help your granddaughter. Clara, I would appreciate the offer, but I don't want you to feel obligated. This isn't about money. It's about dignity. And you can't just try to buy her cure. I'm not trying to buy anything, Clara replied, her voice firm. I'm trying to be a better person, and that includes helping those in need, regardless of anything. The tension in the air felt palpable, and for a moment they stared at each other in silence. Clara could sense the emotional distance that still existed between them, but something inside her finally sparked. She was willing to fight for this new version of herself, and perhaps for a friendship that was just beginning. Clara felt nervous as she looked around the hotel ballroom, where the large fundraising event would take place. She had committed to changing, and this was her chance to prove to herself that she could make a difference. With a microphone in hand and her heart racing, she prepared for the speech that could determine not only the future of Augusto's granddaughter, but also her own redemption. As the guests began to arrive, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Clara spotted Augusto in a corner of the room chatting with some doctors. He seemed more relaxed, but there was still a shadow of distrust in his gaze. Clara took a deep breath, trying to dispel the anxiety that consumed her. When it was her turn to speak, the room fell silent. All eyes were on her. Good evening, everyone, Clara began, her voice trembling slightly. Tonight, we are here for a very special cause. Augusto's granddaughter, a girl full of life and dreams, needs our help. More than that, we must remember that each of us has the power to impact each other's lives. We cannot let pride or our past mistakes prevent us from acting. She paused, feeling the energy in the room. I, more than anyone, know how money can blind. I lived in a world where wealth defined me, but I learned that true wealth lies in the relationships we cultivate and the empathy we offer. When I met Augusto, I didn't see a simple man. I saw an extraordinary human being who, despite adversity, never lost his dignity. Murmurs rose in the room. Clara saw Augusto looking at her, his expression a mix of surprise and pride. She pressed on, determined. I know many of you may not know him, but he is an example of resilience. He has devoted himself to helping others even when facing his own challenges. And now, we need to give back. We need to ensure that his granddaughter has the chance to live and dream. Clara's words resonated through the hall, and she noticed tears in the eyes of some attendees. Life is made of choices, and I choose to help. Today, I invite all of you to join me in this mission. Every contribution, no matter how small, can make a tremendous difference. Let's show that we are capable of more than just admiring material wealth. We can be rich in love and solidarity. After her speech, Clara stepped down from the stage and approached Augusto, who was waiting for her with an intense gaze. You were amazing, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I never imagined you could open up like that, speak with such sincerity. Thank you, Augusto, Clara replied, feeling lighter. I needed to do this. I want you to know that I'm here to help, not just for your granddaughter, but for everything you represent. I want to change the image I've created of myself. Augusto nodded but still wore a cautious expression. It's an important step, Clara, but trust takes time. I see the change in you, but we need concrete actions. I understand, Clara said resolute, and I'm ready to act. This fundraising event is just the beginning. I want to do more, much more. The event continued with enthusiasm, and donations began to roll in. It was a moment of genuine connection together, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Each donation that came in made her feel like she was truly making a difference. During a moment of pause, Clara turned to Augusto, who was surrounded by doctors and nurses. He was smiling, and that filled her with hope. "Are you seeing this?" she asked, gesturing to the room. "People care. They're here because they believe we can do something good." Augusto smiled, but hesitation still lingered in his eyes. "Yes, Clara, but the true test will be when the dust settles. What will you do then?" "I'll do whatever is necessary," she responded with renewed determination. "This is my chance to be a better person, not just for you and your granddaughter, but for myself." And so, as the event unfolded in the background, Clara felt that a new journey was beginning. A journey not only to help Augusto, but to rediscover herself and the true meaning of wealth. Clara was in her office, still immersed in the emotion of the fundraising event she had organized to help Augusto's granddaughter. The phone rang, breaking the silence. She answered, already anticipating a thank you call, but the voice on the other end was different, more formal and urgent. "Clara Montero? This is Mr. Harris from Harris Co. I have a proposal that may interest you. Could you come to our office tomorrow?" Clara's mind began to race. What could be so important? She thought. Whatever it is, it must be related to the event. She agreed to the meeting and hung up, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The next day, Clara entered the luxurious Harris Co. building, one of the most respected conglomerates in the country. Upon being welcomed into the meeting room, she saw several executives waiting for her. Harris, a middle-aged man with an authoritative presence, began to speak. "Clara, we are impressed with your work on the fundraising. Your ability to mobilize the community was remarkable. Therefore, we would like to invite you to take the presidency of our new social responsibility division. We believe your experience and sensitivity to social causes can elevate our company to a new level." Clara was speechless, her heart racing. "Presidency? I don't know what to say." She hesitated, recalling her past insecurities. "Don't worry, Clara. We know you have the necessary experience. Additionally, we have an ongoing project to help small businesses facing difficulties, something that aligns perfectly with your journey." She smiled. The idea of making a difference excited her. "Yes, I accept. I want to help people and make amends where I can." The new opportunity not only represented a new chapter in her career as Clara left the building, a chance for redemption. She felt a wave of something meaningful. Meanwhile, Augusto was at home, sifting through old documents from his company, still grappling with the pain of the past. The realization that his granddaughter needed an expensive treatment weighed heavily on his conscience. He decided he wouldn't ask Clara for help, even though she had shown generosity. Strength and dignity had always been his weapons, and he didn't want to appear vulnerable. It was then that Clara called him, eager to share her news. "Augusto, you won't believe it. I've been invited to be the president of a new social responsibility division at a major company, and I want you to know that I'm determined to help your granddaughter. We're going to get her that treatment." "Clara, that's wonderful, but..." Augusto hesitated, his voice tinged with concern. "I don't want this to become a burden for you. I can face this alone." "No, Augusto. It's not about burden. It's about friendship. You've shown me that true wealth lies in human relationships, and I want to be part of your life, just as you've been part of mine. Let's fight this together." "You've really changed, Clara," he replied, emotion evident in his voice. "I appreciate it, but I still need to think about it." After the call, Clara recalled the crisis that had devastated Augusto's company. An ex-partner, a man who had taken advantage of the situation, was now facing lawsuits for corruption. Clara decided she couldn't let this go unpunished. She gathered information, spoke with lawyers, and prepared a dossier that revealed the whole truth. In a strategic meeting with the Harris Co. team, Clara presented the case, showing how the company could use its influence to expose this corrupt businessman while supporting Augusto at the same time. "We're going to make sure he pays for the damage he caused, not just to Augusto, but to everyone he harmed," Clara said, her determination inspiring everyone in the room. A moment of silence hung in the air, and then one of the executives commented, "Clara, this is risky, but if you believe you can make a difference, I support you." With the team's backing, Clara launched a public campaign, raising her voice against corruption and becoming the advocate for many who had suffered unjustly. Her actions quickly gained traction, and the truth began to emerge. Amid all this, Augusto, moved by Clara's determination, finally decided to accept her help. He invited her to visit his granddaughter in the hospital, where they could discuss the next steps together. Their reunion was filled with emotion, not just because of the struggle they faced, but also because of the friendship that had blossomed between them. "Let's do this together, Clara. True wealth is made up of people who care for one another," Augusto said, with a grateful look. "And I'm going to make this worthwhile, Augusto. You and your granddaughter deserve all the help in the world," Clara replied, feeling that she had finally found her place in the world, alongside someone who truly valued what mattered.